This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone. You can find me on my website, hikingbob.com, which has links to my social media, my columns at the Colorado Springs Independent, the other podcasts we've done, also my photography website. All of that you can find there at hikingbob.com. And also, if you want to help support this podcast, you can do that at Patreon, patreon.com/hikingbob. And you can be one of the people who help support this podcast. Today, I have my co-host on here, Kevin Wild Westendorf joins me today. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, everyone. It's great to be back. You can find me on all my social media at Wild Westendorf on Facebook and Instagram, and my website, which is wildwestendorf.wordpress.com.
Cool. So, Kevin, one of the things I wanted to talk about today is bear encounters, and there's been a lot of that stuff in the news lately. There was, let me start off with like last week, about 10 days before this airs, I was hiking in Cheyenne Mountain State Park doing a trail ambassador hike, and I, encountered somebody who came off the trail, and today had just seen a bear a little ways up on the Medicine Wheel Trail. And people who go to Cheyenne Mountain State Park will know where that is. So we encountered they said they had seen a bear there, didn't have an issue with it. The bear just ran off. And so we went up there on that trail, and we found very, very fresh bear prints in the mud there, and they were very fresh. I mean, eventually they spread out a little bit, but they're pretty fresh. And then later on the backside, the northwest side of the Sundance Trail, there we found bear tracks. We think they were the same one, because if you draw a line between the first set and the second set, it's almost a straight line up there. And then later on, we saw some bear tracks in the mud on the Talon Trail. Now that's way over further southeast from there, so we figured that was a different bears. There have been a lot of reports of bears in that park, and people see bears all the time. Yeah, and for the most part, and we've talked about this a lot on this podcast, is that for the most part, the bears in Colorado, which are black bears, there are no grizzly bears in Colorado. Certainly no brown bears. They're all black bears. It should be important to remember that, regardless of their color, which may be anything from black to brown to cinnamon color, they're all considered to be black bears. They tend to be not very aggressive. There's some instances where they may be, and we always make sure to say that anything can happen at any time. But for the most part, the bears here are pretty skittish and don't want anything to do with people, and they'll run off. And I think, Kevin, that's been your experience, and certainly been mine.
Yeah, it's like what I experienced a few weeks ago, where I had a water break, and and this bear just walked right by me, didn't pay any mind, didn't care that I was there, didn't acknowledge any sounds that I made, because I just used a word that I would not repeat on this podcast, because it scared me so bad. I was just not scared as in like, oh, I'm in fear of my life. I just, you go for a water break and you see this large figure just walk right by you, and it's like it's surprising.
Yeah, don't make me have to bleep you, Kevin. I already had to bleep myself a couple episodes ago. Yeah, and where you were is close to a large residential area, and the bears probably coming down there raiding trash cans and things like that. Here in the park, in the park's a little different, because it's not near any there are not any residential areas that close by. There are some that border the north side of the park, but the best part was we saw signs of a bear, but we didn't see a bear, which is exactly what we expect. We're in the bear's habitat, exactly what we expect. The bear had been nearby, but they were not that close. And, we never saw it. We never heard it. It just did its thing. It came in there and was probably eating berries or leaves or something, and then it just ran off. So, for the most part, the bear did exactly what we expected. We were hoping we could spot it someplace in the distance. I had my camera with a nice big telephoto lens, but trust me, I don't want to spot it very close by. I certainly don't want to surprise one. Don't want to be surprised by one. That's where bad things happen. But for the most part, it was good. Now, there was a report since then of a bear bit somebody as they relaxed in a hammock, and this was on the far south part of Colorado, east of I-25, and east of the town of Trinidad. If you're familiar with that, that's way down there. almost on the New Mexico border, near where Fisher's Peak State Park is. So according to the news article, it's happened around 10 o'clock at night. A person was lying in their hammock, relaxing, and according to the story, they heard a rustling noise. They turned on their headlamp and saw a dark-colored bear next to him. The man said the bear bit him on the upper right arm and then turned and wandered off. The victim left the campground, called for an ambulance, took him to a hospital for treatment of his wound. He has a 2 to 3 inch bite. They do have a picture of it on the news release. I'll include that in the show notes. The victim told the Parks and Wildlife that there was no food or other attractant with them in the hammock that might have lured the bear. A couple of CPW officers responded. They set a trap for the bear in case it returned. And they also called in somebody from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Animal Health Inspection Service with a team of dogs to search for the bear. Apparently, they did not find it. So no idea what's going on there. That's kind of an unusual thing. I think maybe the bear, there may have been some food, if not at this person's campsite, maybe at somebody else's campsite nearby, and the bear got spooked, and that's why it bit the person. It obviously wasn't trying to be too aggressive. It ran off. But they do include on here the usual warning: stash your trash, store attractants, which would be food and beverages and things like that, in bear-proof containers or whatever. Keep your campsite clean, keep your tent clean, lock your RV and your cars, that kind of stuff. So that did happen. And we should make a note that while we spend a lot of time here saying the bears here are pretty docile, they are wild animals, and anything can happen to anybody. Just you need to be on the lookout for it. So that did happen. So things can happen here. I would like to know more about the story. This person said they didn't have any food nearby them in their campsite, but I wonder if maybe the next campsite over may have had something, or 2 campsites over, and the bear was just intention was probably just to keep going through campsites until he found the food. I don't know. It's one possibility of many, I guess.
And I actually recently watched a video of a bear encounter, and it reminded me of something that I forget about too, that a lot of other folks don't think of. But bears are also very, very attracted to just scents in general. So it doesn't necessarily have to be food. It can just be a scent that's very, very attractive to the bear. In this video, this woman is standing like completely still, like a statue, and this small black bear is just going, like, circling around her, keeps like putting his paws on her, keeps like sniffing around, not showing any signs of aggression, but it more of like curious sniffs. And I believe I either read in an article or the comments that it turned out the woman had like a fruity fragrance that she sprayed on herself. And so the bear's like, okay, I smell fruit, but I don't see it. Where is it? And it's the same to not keep that stuff in your car. Like, you don't want to keep soap and other fragrant items inside your car. Otherwise, you'll wake up to your car getting destroyed. But yeah. So I also wondered, that might have been the case if the guy had like a cologne on or some kind of scent, or maybe he ate at a restaurant before going there, because I know a lot of times after a restaurant, like I can smell the smoked food, the cooked food on my clothes. It's also why they say if you have a campfire and you cook food at the campfire, you change your set of clothes too, and you put your clothes with the food where it's locked up.
Right, not in your tent.
Correct, yeah.
Right. So we don't know enough about this, and I'm not here to, 2 things I never do is I never say absolutely you're not going to have an unfortunate bear encounter. We do say that typically are driven by food. And number 2 is that we're never going to say there's no chance of it's going to happen. We also don't say that you need to be overly concerned about it, but you need to take the usual typical precautions, and you kind of highlighted some of the other thing, Kevin, and I got a little bit of heat over this. I wonder why we still light campfires. Do we really need big roaring campfires? Not just because of the fire hazard that they present, how many fires are started by campfires, but also, do we actually really need campfires nowadays? There's food you can bring with you that's dehydrated, like I like to bring. You bring the little jet boil or the little MSR pocket rocket, and you boil up about a half a cup of water. You put it in this container with this nice freeze dried food, and then you stir it up, and then 10 minutes later you have a great meal. Do we really need to have big campfires for cooking? It seems to me that especially if you're in the backcountry, hauling all that food and all the stuff you need to cook it seems like it's a whole heck of a lot of weight to carry with you.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think it's really fun and nice to have a campfire at a campground. I think it's just because we all grew up with it. But I think it's one of those unfortunate things that we've got to acknowledge that we really shouldn't be doing anymore because of climate change and wildfire risk and all that. And it's a bummer. It's really nice to sit around a campfire. And if it's allowed in a state park and you want to bring some hot dogs and ground beef and stuff to make burgers, sure. But especially in the backcountry when things are not accessible by road, it's much harder to put out. If a fire does go nuts, it's much harder to contain that. And I think it just makes a lot more sense to bring a little jet boil or and then you cook a little meal. You can make like a thing of coffee with it. You can rehydrate food. It makes a lot more sense to do that.
Yeah, and you're right though. In a state park, like if you're in Cheyenne Mountain State Park or Mueller State Park, and they've got established fire pits, and there's a lot of people around, that's a little different than being deep in the backcountry. And you're right. If you're one of those places, have a little campfire. They obviously are set up for that. They have, water nearby. They've got all that kind of stuff there. But in the backcountry, it seems to me that I just wonder if it's something really necessary. I understand the nostalgia of it and having that. I get that, but I also get the nostalgia of driving a Model T and having a horse and buggy, but we seem to have grown out of all that too. So I just think that maybe just not as necessary to have all that stuff anymore. I don't know, just me. I know people are going to disagree with me. That's okay. The other thing I want to point out when we're touch base while we're talking about fires is that the Pike in San Isabel National Forest put out a thing about finding unattended campfires, and that's obviously not a good thing. And people need to remember that in Colorado, it's actually a criminal offense to leave your campfire unattended. And it's also if your unattended campfire starts a fire, you can be held criminally liable for the fire that it starts. So for those of you out there who want to have a campfire and you're allowed to have one, and it's really important that you make sure there's no fire restriction, that's fine. I have my opinion. You have yours. If you want to do that and you're allowed to do it, there's no restrictions, do that, but just make sure that fire is completely out. If you cannot put your hand on the coals and keep it there comfortably, it is not out. It needs to be, you need more water to get that fire out. And that's the measure. If you can stick as long as you're not G. Gordon Liddy, who did, people know their history, know what's going on there. And you put your hand on there and you can keep your hand on those ashes without getting burned, then that's when your fire's out. If not, then your fire's not out. So just keep an eye on that. And just, as always, when we talk about bear encounters, I did a long Facebook write-up on not only my page, but the Friends of Cheyenne Mountain State Park page about these bear tracks that we saw. You always have to be aware of your surroundings, know what's going on around you, know what what wildlife may be around you, and just be aware of what's going on. Don't be oblivious. This is, hiking in either a state park or in the backcountry is not the time to have your head in the clouds and not really paying attention to what's going on. So be aware of what's going on around you. Watch for the signs. Watch for fresh bear scat. And it's one of those things I'm not going to describe to you, but you know it when you've seen it. When you see it, that must be what bear scat looks like. So you know what that looks like, and just be aware of all that kind of stuff, and just know what you're, what's going on around you. I talked about a little bit on the previous podcast about my trip to Theodore Roosevelt National Park and encountering some bison, and I was able to keep from getting in any danger because I was just very aware of the body language I was seeing from the bison and what it was telling me. Kind of the same thing goes for whether you run into an elk or a bear or deer or whatever else on our trails around here. So just be aware of all that kind of stuff. Know what's going on around you, and pay attention, that kind of stuff. So I listen to a podcast that I really like called My Favorite Murder, and I think you've heard of it.
Yes, yes.
I don't think I don't know if you listen to it.
I
Um,
I used to back in the day. I just kind of fell off of it, not for like a specific reason. It's just I found other true crime stuff that I preferred more. But yeah.
Okay, well, fair enough. So their latest one, and I'll include a link to this, they spend about an hour and a half to 2 hours on each podcast every week that they talk about a true crime or something significant. So this week's episode number 387, we've almost done as many as they have, is the second part of it is about Glacier National Park's Night of the Grizzlies. And it's about an incident that happened in the late 60s where grizzlies went on a rampage and actually caused a great amount of mayhem
Yeah.
in this campground. And I think it's a pretty famous incident that happened there. In any case, it's worth listening to, and I will leave a link to that if you're, and I'm not being paid anything. The only thing I will say about these two people who do this podcast, they don't like outdoor recreation much. One of their things is don't go, I don't understand they never understand why people go hiking, why people go camping and stuff like that. And while they tell, they use a lot of different sources to tell these stories, a lot of already published stuff. So their storytelling about the incident's pretty accurate. But then after that, they kind of go over like why this happened and why that happened. All I have to say is if you're not an outdoor person, you probably shouldn't be telling people who do outdoor recreation what they're supposed to do. I'll kind of leave it at that. Anyway, I'm going to leave a link to that too. It is kind of fun to listen to. I will warn people ahead of time that sometimes most of the time the language is adult oriented. So if you're a little squeamish about adult language, this may not be the one for you. A plethora of 4-letter words, for lack of a better word.
I also want to use this moment to plug another podcast called National Park After Dark. I got a lot of episodes to catch up on, but when I first found out about them, I was obsessed. So I powered through their first 50 episodes in like a week or two. But they also did a 2-episode series about Night of the Grizzlies.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and it's one of their earlier episodes, so I want to go back to listen to it to see, because a lot of podcasts evolve over time. Like they get better and better about their research and storytelling and stuff.
Eventually, we'll get there.
Oh yeah. Some days.
Sorry, I couldn't help it.
And but I remember a couple years ago when I listened to these episodes, I was at work and I was like, I finished it and I was just so sad. Like it was a horrific night for a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And they explained all the factors that led to the attacks that happened. And it's just wild how far the Park Service has come. Because I don't know if this would be a spoiler, but a part of what led to the attacks was, how do I want to phrase this? So it's not a spoiler. So the park rangers at that time, because this happened in the 60s or 70s,
late 60s,
and we're not very aware of their behavior and conscious of how their behavior and actions was ultimately dangerous to the wildlife and eventually the lives of the people affected. They treated wildlife like it was a sideshow. Right. Rather than, oh no, this is wildlife, you don't touch them, you don't attract them, you like it's your job to scare them away, blah blah blah. But yeah, it was cool to learn that part in the sense of in the context of realizing how far the National Park Service has gone since then, and our understanding and respect of the land. It just sucks that a tragedy had to happen for them to kind of look inward and think oh, we were a part of the problem.
Yeah, at one point the National Park Service actually attracted animals into the parks and actually, I don't want to say encourage people to interact with animals, but certainly did not discourage it.
Yeah.
And they do mention in the podcast I'm referring to that incident really changed it, and everybody's like, this is a pretty stupid idea. And maybe we should keep people away from these wild animals, which is kind of going back to what we talked about at the beginning about not having attractants in your campsite. And we regularly talk about people who think it's a good idea to go pet the big furry animal out there, whether it be a bison or an elk or something like that, and why we shouldn't do that. But 40, 50 years ago, that was kind of the thing to do.
Yeah.
And if you've ever watched Ken Burns' series about national parks, which is a great series, there's one episode on there where they talk about this, about how they would attract the bears into the parks by putting out food for them. So they would come into the parks and people go up and pet the little black bear. And like, now we look at that and our heads would explode. But that was how they did it, and not that long ago. And this is kind of one of the, and I'm not giving away too much, this is kind of what caused this incident in Glacier back in the 60s. So anyway, I think it's kind of interesting for people. And if I'm loath to promote other podcasts, but give credit where credit's due. The other podcast I like listening to is called Park Predators.
Oh, I know about that one too. Yeah.
That's done by a gal. She talked about incidents specifically that happen in parks per se, although not necessarily. They could be just in the forest and everything. So there's that. Kevin, I'm a leave no trace instructor.
Oh yeah.
And I got certified on that a couple of years ago with the Friends of the City Colorado Springs Parks Department. Did a class and I attended for a weekend and got certified as that. And I firmly believe in leave no trace principles, and we talk about that stuff a lot here. And every time I do a TV appearance or, and on the podcast, talk about a lot, it's always about leave no trace because I firmly believe in those things. We talked about last week about a movie, kind of a fluff movie about hiking, but they talked a lot about leave no trace principles on it, which I really appreciated. And the folks at Leave No Trace are good people, but they just announced a policy change, which I really am having a little bit of an issue with. So basically, if you want to be a member of Leave No Trace, you have to, sign up, and there's a membership fee every year that you sign up and you become a member of Leave No Trace. And that, of course, helps them support their mission and pays for people and stuff like that. That's pretty cool. I have no issues with that. What I do have an issue with is an email they sent out a couple of weeks ago and basically said that, my level of trainer is not going to be called a level 1 trainer. And there's now going to be a certification, and they're going to require a recertification. Here's the problem with that. They now want me to pay them to teach their curriculum, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So starting in 2025, 2 more years, I have to pay them $50 a year, $50 for 2 years worth of being a trainer. So I have to pay them to teach their class, in addition to paying them a membership fee every year to be a member of Leave No Trace. And the interesting part about that, which I also have a problem with, is when I clicked on the link to renew my membership, which I've already done, is there's different levels of membership that cost different dollar amounts. Interestingly, when I clicked on renew my membership, it went right to the $100 amount for
okay.
Which is like, really? So I have a bit of a heartburn with this. Now you can set your own amount to be a member, with as little as $10, $25, $50. You can set it. But I guess the problem is that they want me to pay them to be a instructor to teach their class, to teach their principles, their agenda, which again, I'm completely in favor of their agenda and support it entirely, on top of paying to be a member every year. And I talked to some people who have higher levels of training than I do, master trainers, and there's like the people who teach me to be a trainer. They were surprised by this announcement. They had no idea it was coming. And they also have issues with it because it's not like it's a professional certification. When I was a fire investigator, I had to maintain a professional certification to be a fire investigator. I had to recertify it every couple of years. I had to pay for it, but it was required for me to go out and investigate fires. When I got called into court because we arrested somebody or because there was a lawsuit that I wasn't part of, but somebody was suing a device manufacturer because they said their device started a fire, and I was the investigating officer. I would have to be able to show them that I am credentialed to be able to make these determinations.
Yeah.
So that was a professional. So I had to pay for that. But of course, my employer paid those for me because it was a requirement for the job. These Leave No Trace training certification levels do not rise to that thing. They're not professional certifications, especially when you're a level 1 trainer like I am, which is the bottom level trainer. My job is just to tell the public how to be a good trainer. So I have a bit of an issue with it. I've sent them an email saying, really, I have to pay you to teach your class, to teach your stuff, and then I have to pay you every year to be a member on top of that. I would not have an issue if I had to pay one or the other. If it's $50 every 2 years, and then it was also my membership fee, I could probably buy into that a little bit because that's $25 a year. That's fine. But the fact that they want to, which could conceivably cost me at the very least $100 every 2 years, I kind of had an issue with that. And I'm not here to air the Leave No Trace's dirty laundry, but my issue is, one, I emailed them, never got an answer back, which I'm kind of surprised at. It sounds like they don't care. And the other part is, I wonder how many people who are thinking like I am, why should I bother doing this? And a couple of people I talked to have master trainer certification, which is apparently pretty expensive to get. They only have it because they got a scholarship to attend a much longer and more involved class than I did, that they would not be able to do it on their own. So now they're like, I got to pay for this every couple of years to recertify. Why do I need to pay on top of that? And will my employer pay me if it's not a professional certification? So just an interesting thing. Again, I want to make it very clear. I believe in Leave No Trace principles, endorse them entirely. I think I live their principles in my actual outdoor activities as well as I can. I like to think that I'm a good ambassador for that and a good example for that, but I'm a little concerned about that. So if anybody from Leave No Trace is paying attention, A, how about answering my email? And B, how about next time you survey people and get an idea of what they think is tolerable or not tolerable, and maybe rethink this really bad idea. The good thing is it's 2 more years down the road. So hopefully they have 2 more years to think about how they want to do this.
So I was aware of this training and the class in the past because you discussed it. What does it consist of? Because I'm trying to think of how, like, why are there different levels in terms of, because it's just a set of rules. I mean, it's a like a somewhat short list of rules. So what does the training consist of?
Well, for mine, it was just a matter of being able to understand the 7 principles, the Leave No Trace principles, and how to either, whether in a formal class setting or in an informal setting, you run into people on the trails, or I mention them here, or I'll mention them on a podcast, or I'm sorry, in a newspaper column, or sometimes like the latest TV thing I did last week with Fox 21. Is it just about how to explain to the layperson, here's some of these principles, and here's why here's why we have these principles, and here's why you need to follow them. Like we talk a lot, Kevin, you and I talk a lot about, planning and preparing, why people should look at a map and understand where they're going and have the right gear. That's principle number 1, plan and prepare accordingly. So that's what my level is. Now, as you go up in levels, I think they're designed more for professionals, the river guides, the fishing guides, the
I see.
hunting guides, to more, the more practically use those when they may be out in a camp full of people who are hunting and fishing or something like that, or to train people like me. So they're more like the idea people. Here are some ideas we can give you on how to tell people what these principles are. Kind of like when I went to class, the trainers who are training me we're saying, here's some examples of how you can help people understand these things. So I guess that's what the kind of the difference is.
Okay, okay.
Did that make sense? I guess that's
Yeah,
the
and
best way I can to describe it.
I think what's strange to me with these changes is it makes sense why you would have to recertify in your field as a firefighter and that stuff, because that's applicable to the law and people and resources. Same with CPR. It makes sense that you have to recertify to make sure you actually remember the right way to resuscitate someone and not actually like, oh, it's been 10 years since I took a class and now I'm gonna break a bunch of ribs or like the wrong way or whatever. But when it comes to leave no trace, I don't understand quite why you have to recertify. I get having a refresher and stuff, but then to pay more money on top of that, that's just yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I even, every once in a while, I think the recertification is mostly like, how many hours have you done? What have you done? Give us some examples of what you've done to promote Leave No Trace. Of course, I could send them links to my newspaper columns where I talk about it, to podcasts. We've talked about it, TV appearances. Say, this is what I've done to do that. I think they'd be fine with that. I don't think I have to go out and actually teach classes, something I'm not all that interested in doing. And you're right. When I was a fire investigator, I had, my fire investigation determinations could put somebody in jail. They had that, or they could be responsible for a lawsuit decision that could cost somebody hundreds, thousands, millions of dollars. So, of course, they wanted me to be appropriately trained and recertified and up on the latest science and things like that, because using my training and what I determined could have life-changing consequences for people.
Yeah.
Obviously, I mean, I had to train everything in my job. I had to recertify as just being a firefighter, just to go out and put the wet stuff on the red stuff. Every couple of years, I had to go recertify just to be a basic firefighter. I had to recertify my EMT every several years, and my first aid, and my CPR and my hazmat certification and my wildland certification. Everything had to be recertified, because if you're out there saving lives or trying to save lives, you obviously have to be up on the latest stuff. So I get it. I don't even have an issue with recertifying Leave No Trace, because they want to make sure you're actually doing something. I just have an issue with paying for it, especially at that level. And then on top of that, having to pay a yearly membership fee to do what their job is. So, for all you out there, this is not a hammering of the Leave No Trace principles. Please follow the 7 Leave No Trace principles. I'll even include a link in the show notes for you. Follow the Leave No Trace principles. They are principles we should be using all the time. But I'm just trying to get the attention of the Leave No Trace people who don't seem to be paying much attention there. So maybe now they will. Kevin, one thing I want to talk about too is something technical. I heard from somebody who was, how do I want to word it? In Cheyenne Mountain State Park, if you've hiked there, we have what we call the little lollipops, the red markers, round markers, and on some of them there's a rectangular marker that said this is GPS number 25, and it'll have a set of GPS coordinates under it. I had somebody say that they were out there with their phone and the Cotrex, the state's Cotrex app, and they thought that these markers were way off. Now, those markers have been there for a lot of years since the park was created. I think if they were way off, we would know about it by now. But there's a couple of things I want people to understand about when you're talking about these things. And if you're familiar with these, this is not going to be a surprise. But if you're new to this kind of stuff, this is a little different. Is there are a number of different formats in which coordinates are recorded, and the format used in Cheyenne Mountain State Park is the most common one that people use. When you get your GPS, it's what it's set up for, typically. The one that's used in the state's Cotrex app is a different format. And there's even a variation of that format that is out there. And what I'm getting at is if you have a set of numbers that is a GPS coordinate, if you're entering that into like a online map system, say it's Google Earth, the app you're using has to have the same format as how you recorded the coordinates. Am I making any sense there? I know this is kind of complicated. And I will link to a Google support document. So there's a couple of different formats. There's decimal degrees, there's degrees, minutes, and seconds, and there's degrees and decibel minutes. So there's different formats that are out there. And some of them have a plus sign or a minus sign, which indicates whether they are, east or west or north or south. And you got to get those right. But it's super important that when you're using or recording or entering GPS coordinates, that you use the exact same format as the app or the device you're using. Like my GPS is set up for one type of coordinate. If I try to punch in something else and it's a string of numbers and I try to make it fit into the format there I'm going to be wrong. It's going to be way off. And it doesn't take much more than a misplaced decimal point or being in the wrong format to really mess things up. So I will say that if you were using this kind of stuff, and this is where, Kevin, you and I have talked, where we talk about if you're going to go hiking, one of the things you should have is a map or a GPS. You have to know how to use them. And one of the things to know how to use is understanding what format you're recording your coordinates in, so that when you give them to somebody else, they're ready to use them in the same format you're giving them to them in. And there's ways you can convert them. In my GPS, I can just change the format in the GPS and it'll automatically convert them, whatever's stored in there for me.
Yeah. Same
But
here.
I need to be aware that that's available. So if you're using these different apps and stuff like that, now Google Earth is pretty flexible. I think no matter how you enter the format, it'll convert it to whatever it's natively using. But you have to enter it the right way too. If there's a minus sign or a plus sign, or a decimal here or a decimal there, or a degree sign or a minute sign, those things you have to enter them exactly like you have them recorded, or you are going to get erroneous information. I was out hiking today when we're recording this in Cheyenne Mountain State Park, do a trail ambassador hike, and I did about 5 miles, and I randomly picked, almost a dozen GPS coordinates, and I compared them to my GPS, because my GPS and their coordinates on those signs are using the same format. And for the most part, you go to the right of the decimal point, like 3 or 4 spaces before I found any deviation. And basically, and that's well within a few feet. My GPS records typically plus or minus 10 feet, within plus or minus 10 feet, which is actually really good for a handheld GPS with a antenna on it the size of a postage stamp that's embedded in there. That's pretty good recording. Also remember that your cell phone GPS probably does not have the best GPS receiver on. They're better than they used to be by a long shot, but probably not the best GPS receiver around. And one more thing, when you're using an app, for example, and I'll go back to the Cotrex app, when you bring up the Cotrex app and you hit the little icon for it to find your location, you're going to be a blue dot, but around that blue dot is going to be a gray circle.
Yep.
And you've seen this. So that gray circle starts off being very big circle. And then as you stand there for a minute, that circle gets smaller, 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 and smaller. And what that is that's the accuracy increasing. And if you watch the coordinates in the bottom of the display, you'll see that those numbers change because it is getting more and more accurate, to a point where eventually that gray circle will be about the same size as that blue dot that indicates your place. You should not be recording any of those coordinates until that gray circle surrounding your blue dot is as small as it can possibly get.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it may be plus or minus 100 feet, 200 feet, and then it's going to be plus or minus 80 feet, then 50 feet. Eventually it's going to get down to being plus or minus 10 feet. You could stand anywhere and look around you and see 10 feet away from you. That's close enough for what we do, for what outdoor recreation is. You don't need to be much more accurate than that. If you're a land surveyor, they have all kinds of other fancier devices that get them down to within inches. We don't need to be within inches for hiking. You're either within 10 feet of the trail or you're not. We don't need to be that accurate. Of course, those devices cost thousands and thousands of dollars instead of a few $100s for a cell phone or a GPS or something like that. So
when I had a Garmin watch, I would start to track the hike, but it would basically indicate that I've got to stay still.
Right.
for a certain amount of time so it can align and link up with enough of the satellites in the sky. Because if you start to track it and you start going, just like you said, I could be 200 feet off because it's only linked with one satellite instead of 6 or 7 or 8. Oh, man, I'm trying to remember what the limit. I think it links up to 8.
You would need at least 3 for it to lock in. You need at least 3.
Okay, yeah.
So if it's not linking to 3, it's not going to give you anything worth a darn because
Yeah.
it triangulates them. But you're exactly right. The more you have, the better you are.
And I don't have a Garmin watch anymore. I've got an Apple Watch Ultra, which is designed specifically for the outdoor use, and it has more GPS bands, or it has more bands for geolocation, because GPS is an American one, but it also has a band for Galileo, which is European, and GLONASS, which is Russian. And I think it's also compatible with the Chinese one too. So it can link up with a bunch of satellites. And I don't use the default Apple Watch app to track my hikes. I use a third-party one, which it's very like intrinsic in its details. It's customizable. It has like all kinds of data points, and it also supports GPS-like formats that I didn't know were a thing. I stick with GPX, which is the format that's most universally used.
Right.
And like I'm hiking. I'm not doing a marathon in the Himalayas, so I don't need to research all this other stuff to use. But yeah, so even that app will set a timer saying like, all right, wait this amount of seconds, and then it determines like, okay, we're good now, and then I go. If you use a basic app on your phone, it's not going to be accurate because it just starts to track immediately, and then you go, there's no timer. Because I found that back in the day, I'm sure the mileage I tracked several years ago, the mileage I would track on my hikes is probably off a lot because I would use my phone as a tracker, and then I would just go on this Strava app and hit like record and just go.
When I turn on my GPS, it doesn't take too long. And the older one took a lot longer.
Yeah,
the new one doesn't take so long, but it takes about a minute or two. And all I have to do is watch it. I have a little screen on there that says GPS accuracy. And when it gets down to 10 feet, and then I let it sit there for about another minute, make sure that doesn't change. When it gets to 10 feet and it doesn't change, sometimes in the desert, it'll get down to 6 or 7 or 8 feet, gets even closer because it's got a clear view of the sky. That's when I know it's ready to go. And that's when I reset the trip data, reset the current activity, and start from 0 from there. It still kept all the stuff I've saved. The other thing you remember about your watch is typically your watch is down by your side. It's next to your body. It's moving a lot. So there's variation in how well it receives. Your cell phone is going to end up in your pocket, next to your keys, next to change, all those things. Being next to your body absorbs the signal and it keeps it from being super accurate. I know when I take my phone out of my pocket to look at Cotrex, it starts with a very big gray circle around my blue dot, and it finally gets close because it's not in a good place. My GPS, on the other hand, that I wear all the time, is on a carabiner attached on my chest strap, way up near my shoulder. So it is open to the air all the time. It's open. The only place it could be any better than that if I stuck it on my head, which may be an idea. So it's always where it has an open view of the sky. It's not surrounded by anything. So that's why I'm always confident that my GPS is tracking accurately and is working really well. This goes back to just understanding if you're going to be using these tools, you have to understand how they work. Same thing if you buy a map and you've never had a class in map reading before, the map is just going to be a meaningless bunch of lines. And unless you know what they mean, they don't mean anything to you. So I always hear from somebody who says, I just need a map. Yeah, well, who taught you how to read a map? You have to learn how to read. And there's a coordinate system on the map. You understand the coordinate system on the map. The same coordinate system we use on the GPS, just one's electronic and one's on paper. All the stuff is the same. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out, that if you're using these devices, to be aware of how they work and take some time. There's all kinds of resources out there. REI teaches classes in GPS based. If you're a Colorado Mountain Club member, they have classes on how to do this stuff, how to read maps, how to read GPSs, how to understand how they work, all that kind of stuff. And again, we should also mention, always have 2 devices. You're going to have a GPS have a map. The other reason why I'm not crazy about using your phone is because your battery life on your phone, which isn't very much to begin with, goes down as
Oh,
you're
yeah.
actively tracking something. On the other hand, my GPS, it'll last days and days and days on a set of batteries or a charge. I use rechargeables in mine, or how long the battery's charged. So another reason why I kind of like a separate GPS. But I get it; it's an extra expense. Not everybody wants to spend it. That's fine. Just understand the limitations of what you're using, and understand how they work. And this is how you keep. This is again how you keep yourself out of trouble. So
I will say though that the signage up past North Cheyenne Canyon, beyond or on off the Gold Camp Road, going up to St. Mary's Falls, the mileage on that is so off.
it's way off.
But that sign is decades old.
I think it's
'cause
probably
I
close to
remember-
100 years old.
Yeah. I mean, and because I was basing back when I was a baby hiker, like 8 years ago, I was basing a hike I was doing up Mount Rosa based on those signs, and those signs are way off.
Yeah, the difference, where the sign says that the distance to St. Mary's Falls is off by, I want to say, half a mile,
Yeah,
which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is when you get there and you're at the mileage it's supposed to be at, and you're still a half a mile from the falls on probably one of the harder parts of the trail by the time you get up that far. So it is off by quite a bit. And that's one of those old cast iron signs that he used a torch to cut the letters into and stuff like that. It's pretty medieval stuff. I would say that if you run into one of those older Forest Service signs, take the mileage on there with a grain of salt. Now, new signs have been put up recently. They're using GPSs. They're much more accurate. But if you're running one of those old cast iron signs that look like it was cut in there with a torch and a hacksaw blade and maybe a file, that may be close, but I wouldn't bet that that's actually a good distance. So just be aware of that. But that's a good point, Kevin, that is off by quite a bit. It's off by a long shot. The hike up there is a fair bit longer. You're going to end up doing more than a mile round trip, more than that sign would indicate.
yeah.
I think that's a safe way to put that. Kevin, I don't think that we got anything else going on here. What about you? You got anything else? You got any hikes planned? Any outings planned? I've got a couple of little things planned for this year. I got a camping trip coming up later in the month, and I'm already starting to plan. I planned stuff for next year, and I got my 2024 and 2025 Nat Geo expedition catalog in the mail today.
Nice.
May
Nice.
peruse that, see what I can afford to do. But what about you? Got anything coming up soon?
Well, this weekend I'm planning on doing what's called a 6-peak loop in North Cheyenne Canyon, which is not a known hike. It's kind of a made up. It's not a made up route, but it's a route that someone did years ago, where essentially it's this giant loop to where you hit the 6 highest peaks in North Cheyenne Canyon. And one of them I had not found on a map or anything, but they called one of the peaks Apocalypto.
Huh.
So I have never heard of this peak. I've been on this peak before, because it's a part of a larger trail system. I just don't know if that's an actual name of the peak or that's just something this person made up, because Apocalypto just sounds cool. But yeah, I really want to do that. It's a 16.5-mile loop.
Wow.
And of course you go to like up to Mount Cutler and Mount Muskoka, down Daniels Pass. And the route that I was given, the GPX route I was given, was before they created the trail system in Sweetwater Canyon. So I would have to make a little bit of a change in that area. But the rest of the trails, it just connects a bunch of trails, and apparently it goes to the 6 highest peaks in the park. I think that'd be a really, really fun way to kind of have a new experience in Cheyenne Canyon, because I know that place like the back of my hand, which is not a bad thing. It's still an incredibly fun place to hike. It's just very familiar. So it'd be nice to have something new to do there beyond Sweetwater Canyon. So that's my plan for next weekend.
So I'm guessing they are going to be Cutler, Muskoka. Now, I'd be interested in if Stove Mountain is included in that. That's a very difficult hike. Is Stove Mountain one of those?
It is not. No.
It is not. Interesting, because that's the peak right above St. Mary's Falls. There is no real trail up there, and I've been up there twice, but it's a difficult hike. So then I'm guessing it's probably Kineo,
Yep.
Buckhorn,
Yep.
Maze, but that's 5. So what's the 6th one that I'm making? Rosa would be too far out, unless they're including Rosa, but that'd be way out.
No.
That's not actually considered North Cheyenne Canyon by the time you get to Mount Rosa.
Let me look. I'm looking at the route right now, but yeah, it's Mount Cutler, Muskoka, Apocalypto,
That's the one, which I have no idea
Yeah.
where that is.
Kineo, Buckhorn, and Mace. Yep.
Maze. Okay. Cool. Well, you're gonna have to let. Do you start at Mid Columbine? I guess that'd be the easiest place to start, or you start at the Cutler Trailhead.
Nope. You start at Starsmore.
Really?
Yeah. So
Why
I
do
mean,
that?
it's a
Start at the
big,
Cutler
big
Trailhead.
hike.
Start at the Cutler Trailhead. Cut off about 4 miles a hike. I would start at Cutler. Well, and you can do that because if that was done before the Sweetwater Canyon trails, they did not have the Creekside Trail
Correct.
in there. So you could actually start at Cutler because you can come down Columbine, take the Creekside Trail, and
Oh,
come right
I
back to Mount
could.
Cutler.
Yeah,
So-
that's right.
Do yourself a favor, make it a 12-mile hike. Start at Mount Cutler.
Yeah, because this route that I got from my friend is when she did it back in 2018 or 2017, I think. So it's old.
And to do
Um,
that loop, you would have to either start at the very least Mid Columbine Trailhead or at Starsmore to be able to make a loop out of it, because you couldn't cut back across to the Mount Cutler Trailhead. But now you can with the Creekside Trail.
And I'm looking at the data on the GPX file. It was 5,000 feet of elevation gain.
That's about right.
So it's a workout.
Cool. I got to figure out where this Apocalypto. I can guarantee there's no official name, because I would know if that was an official name.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I do not. I shouldn't say I guarantee it. I do not recognize that name as a trail.
Same here, and
peak
I can't find that name anywhere on any maps. I think it's a name that this person made up
yeah.
when they realized they were at a peak of a smaller mountain and was like, well, there's not a name for it, so I'm gonna call it this. So
Well, if they had any, well, I shouldn't say that. Excuse me. They should include Stove Mountain, but that alone is a very difficult hike. I get why they didn't include it. Then you'd have to take 2 days to do it or something.
Oh yeah. That'd be a long hike.
I think we're planning on having you on next week, so we'll definitely want to get an update from you on how that goes.
Cool, perfect.
All right. Well, I think, Kevin, with that, we'll just say goodbye to everybody. I got a dog here that's getting itchy. I think he wants to go for a walk, or what do you
Oh,
want,
yeah.
Paul? He's sitting here looking at me, panting, like, you had a walk today. I know you had a walk. Anybody want a dog? Anyway, I think with that, we'll say goodbye to everybody, Kevin.
All right, we'll talk to you later.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. We'll talk to you next time.
Before you go, did you know you can rate and review our Studio 809 podcasts? That will help us, because our egos really need to have thousands and thousands of listeners. But that helps our wonderful sponsors reach more ears too. And we do love our sponsors. So just go to Studio 809 or any individual 809 podcast in your iTunes or podcast app and click on ratings and reviews. Thanks.